Military Personnel Subcommittee of the House Armed Services Committee. Our topic today is the reserve components as an operational force, potential legislative and policy changes, and we truly have a distinguished panel here today. This is as good as I've ever seen in my service in Congress, so I thank you for being here. Today, the subcommittee will turn its attention to the important issue of maintaining an operational reserve that has been deployed as a partner with its active component for the last 10 years. The committee believes the reserve component will continue to serve an important and vital role post-Iraq and Afghanistan as the United States military continues to engage in conflict, partnership efforts, and humanitarian assistance around the globe. The key issue before us today is the ability to maintain access to the operational reserves in a future peacetime environment when the military is not operating under the Emergency Mobilization Authority. We will examine a Department of Defense proposal to provide a more flexible involuntary mobilization authority and how the reserve will maintain a ready and viable force. To help us explore these issues, we are joined today by an excellent and extraordinary panel consisting of the Chief of the National Guard Bureau and the Chiefs of the Reserve Components. I would ask that all witnesses keep their oral opening statements to 3 minutes. Without objection, all written statements will be entered into the record to include testimony submitted for the record by Mr. David L. McGinnis, Acting Assistant Secretary of Defense for Reserve Affairs. Before I turn it over to our dedicated ranking member, Ms. Susan Davis from California, I would like to introduce our panel. We're honored today to have General Craig R. McKinley, U.S. Air Force Chief, National Guard Bureau; Lieutenant General Jack Stultz, U.S. Army Chief, Army Reserve; Vice Admiral Debank, U.S. Navy Chief of Naval Reserve; Lieutenant General Charles Stenner, U.S. Air Force Chief, Air Force Reserve; Lieutenant General Harry Wyatt, U.S. Air Force Director, Air National Guard; Major General Raymond Carpenter, U.S. Army Acting Director, Army National Guard; Major General Darrell L. Moore, U.S. Marine Corps Director, Reserve Affairs Division, U.S. Marine Corps Reserve; Rear Admiral David Callahan, U.S. Coast Guard Acting Director of Reserve and Leadership, U.S. Coast Guard Reserves. And now turn to Ms. Susan Davis for her opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I certainly look forward to hearing from our reserve component leadership today. I have to tell you, from where we sit right here, it really is a very distinguished and impressive panel, and we appreciate your all being here. It's very bright, actually. Last year, we focused our attention on what it means to be an operational reserve force and examined what policies, what laws and practices needed to be addressed to ensure a sustainable reserve force. Since September 11, 2001, nearly 650,000 National Guardsmen and reservists have been deployed, the majority of whom have served in the theater of combat operations. Over the past 10 years, the reserve components have transitioned from a strategic reserve to an operational one. However, as requirements for deployment begin to decline, the question for the reserve components is how they maintain their operational role in an era in which we will see decreasing resources. One of the questions that we have before the subcommittee is what legal authorities and policies are needed to best support the continued development of the reserves as an operational reserve force while ensuring that the understanding and support from families, communities, and employers for continued deployment of Guard and Reserve personnel continues. Mr. Chairman, I'm interested in hearing from our witnesses on how best we can address this question and others as we move forward in this new environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. General McKinley, you may begin.
Chairman Wilson, Ranking Member Davis, members of the subcommittee, it's an honor and a privilege to be here with you today. Mr. Chairman, we welcome your leadership to the subcommittee, and we're incredibly proud to have a former member of the National Guard chairing this important subcommittee. We're also proud to have your son serving in our ranks. Thank you. Today there are 460,000 members of the Army and Air National Guard. Our strength is on mark and our retention is even better. With me today and assisting me is our Director of the Air National Guard, General Wyatt, and our Acting Director of the Army National Guard, General Carpenter, and I also have our Director of our Joint Staff, Major General Randy Manner, with us today. Over the past 10 years of military operations in Iraq, Afghanistan, and elsewhere around the world, the National Guard has been a full partner. As a member of the total force, the National Guard successfully transformed into an operational force. This transformation would not have been possible without the significant investments this Congress made in the National Guard and Reserve, and we thank you all very much for that support. We must continue to be used as an operational force, we believe, so that significant investment is not squandered. Today our nation faces many threats. One of the most significant national challenges is our current fiscal situation. As the Department of Defense evolves to match emerging threats, it must do so with an eye toward fiscal responsibility. This includes openness and transparency in its planning for the future budget and force structure of the reserve component. Budget cuts and decisions must not disproportionately affect the reserve component in our new role as an operational force. The fiscal decisions made today will dramatically influence the reserve component of the future and ultimately the nation's ability to respond to future contingencies at home and abroad. Of particular importance to us is codifying assured access to the National Guard. That is why we work closely with the Army, the Air Force, the Secretary of Defense, and the governors of this nation to develop a legislative proposal to change current call-up authorities for the reserve component. This proposal would ensure the Secretary of Defense can support combatant commanders' needs for missions other than war. This authority will also allow the Department of Defense to utilize the National Guard's unique capability throughout the world. Today, the National Guard supports many combatant commanders in theater security cooperation missions. The State Partnership Program is an example of the global influence the National Guard's unique capability can provide. The need for partnership building missions will continue to grow in the future, and the National Guard stands ready to provide its years of expertise. Although the demands for these missions will continue to grow, today many of the combatant commanders' priorities are unfunded through the Department's guidance for employment of the force. That is why, along with access, it's crucial that the operational force is fully funded. Estimates for the cost of the Reserve's operational role vary greatly. That is why it's important to begin transparent budget planning now. Today, the overseas contingency operation accounts fund much of the reserve component deployment, training, and family support. To ensure continued funding to support the operational force, our training, readiness, equipment, and personnel costs must be included in the base budget. I'm thankful that the active Army has taken these concerns seriously and included the National Guard's operational role in their future budget planning. The Department of Defense must embrace the reality of the Reserve as an operational force and the associated costs and adequately address them in future programming. As an operational force, it is important that the National Guard leadership structure reflect the crucial role our forces are playing. The National Guard Bureau has grown with the soldiers and airmen of the operational force and is now a joint activity and no longer simply a support entity. Our knowledge and experience in homeland security issues is unrivaled in the Department of Defense, and we are the only force that can advise the Department of Defense leadership on the crucial role National Guardsmen play at the local level. A top priority during my tenure as Chief is to ensure the organization of the National Guard Bureau supports our new role as that joint activity of the Department of Defense and fosters the development and mentorship for future general officers to serve in my current position. I'd like to ask General Wyatt to make a brief statement as well as General Carpenter, and then I look forward to answering your questions.
Chairman Wilson and Ranking Member Davis, as we gather here today, there are Air Guardmen fighting in Iraq, Afghanistan, supporting NATO operations in Libya, providing air logistics support to the National Science Foundation in Greenland, and helping to defend U.S. interests on every continent around the globe. In addition, Air Guard men and women are protecting the skies over our very heads with the Air Sovereignty Alert mission, assisting civil authorities protect life and property in the U.S., including helping flood and tornado recovery efforts in the Midwest. There are Air Guard members helping U.S. Customs and Border Patrol secure our southern borders, and so far this summer, Air National Guard aerial firefighting units have dropped over 350,000 gallons of fire retardant on wildfires across the Southwest in support of the National Forest Service. Your Air Guard is able to do this because Congress had the wisdom to provide the funding and the authorities needed to create and sustain an Air National Guard, a Guard that's capable of functioning as both an operational force augmenting the active duty Air Force's day-to-day operations, and as a reserve force permitting the total Air Force to rapidly expand its capability and capacity to meet threats to our national security. As we look to the future, we are working closely with the United States Air Force leadership to ensure the Air National Guard remains ready and accessible so that your investment and faith in your Guard is not lost. To remain a viable operational component, the Air National Guard requires dedicated professional people, modern equipment, and training. People are our most valuable asset because a Guard airman is most difficult to replace of all the elements of our force. Training and experience take time, and there is no shortcut or quick fix. We owe them the best equipment and training available because seamless integration into the joint warfight requires compatible equipment and practice. The second part of being an operational component is accessibility. The U.S. Air Force must have confidence that they can obtain the Air Guard's help when needed. In fact, we've answered over 75% of our requests for forces from our parent service with volunteerism. The DoD proposed changes to 12304 will help by expanding the Secretary of Defense's ability to call upon the reserve components. The budget provision of 12304 is equally important since a major part of accessibility is having the funds, MPA days, available to use the Air National Guard. Again, thank you for your continued support of your Air National Guard, and I look forward to answering your questions.
General Carpenter.
Chairman Wilson, Ranking Member Davis, committee members, it's an honor and a privilege to be here today to represent the 360,000 plus soldiers in the Army National Guard. Of those soldiers, 37,266 are currently mobilized. More than half have had combat experience, and the sacrifice of the soldiers, their families, and employers has been tremendous. Looking back on the past decade, the Army National Guard has been there from the very beginning. The New York National Guard was among the first on the scene at the World Trade Center on 9/11, as was the Maryland and Virginia Guard shortly after the Pentagon was attacked. Beginning with 9/11, the response of the Army National Guard has continued to shoulder our responsibilities in the overseas fight in Afghanistan and Iraq, while simultaneously responding to events in the homeland, including Katrina, Deep Horizon oil spill, and the many firsts in emergencies and disasters in 2011, devastating tornadoes, unprecedented floods, and wildfires, affecting almost half of the states. There is no question the Army Guard has proven its worth, and our citizen soldiers deserve our deepest gratitude. I would like to specifically address the issue of access to the Army National Guard for non-named contingencies. The Department of Defense requested a change in the statute, Section 12304, which would allow the reserve components to be involuntarily called with prior coordination at the service chief level, as well as the necessary budgetary authority to support the deployment. The Army National Guard and the Adjutant Generals are staunch advocates of the change in statute. We think that it will allow for the continued critical contributions of our soldiers and units in the effective use of soft power, that is, theater security and cooperation, in the hope of reducing the possibility of a mobilized military response in the future. We think our soldiers, equipped with their battlefield experience and their civilian skills, as well as their strong desire to be used and make a meaningful contribution to the state and nation, are the right force at the right time. Without the change in statute, they will be denied the opportunity. Finally, and as you might expect, I believe the Army National Guard is the best value for America. Force structure and military power can be sustained in the Army National Guard as an operational force for a fraction of the regular cost. Supporting capability in the Army National Guard not only makes good business sense, it is a twofer. By that I mean the same forces available to the governor of the state, territory, or district in times of emergency and disaster, as well as the President of the United States to meet the requirements of the nation in a federal status. The Army National Guard is a force forward deployed in our area of operation, the homeland. The same force is battle-tested and well-equipped for the overseas fight should the need arise. Truly a best value for America. We should not rush to reduce the size, structure, or capability of the Army National Guard without significant analysis and thorough deliberation. In closing, I would like once again to acknowledge the critical role your committee has played in building and sustaining the best National Guard I've seen in my career. I look forward to your questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now proceed to General Stenner, Air Force Reserve.
Chairman Wilson, Ranking Member Davis, committee members, and fellow service members, thank you for permitting me the opportunity to be with you to have this constructive conversation regarding one of the most important parts of my job, ensuring the over 70,000 citizen airmen making up the Air Force Reserve have the resources and training essential to maintaining readiness. My written testimony outlines our readiness successes and challenges, but briefly I'd like to mention the fact that reservists continue to play an increasing role in ongoing global operations. They support our nation's needs, providing operational capabilities around the world. As we speak, Air Force reservists are serving in every combatant command area of responsibility. There are approximately 8,600 Air Force reservists currently activated to support missions. That number includes our force's contribution to the Japanese relief effort and direct support to coalition operations in Libya, as well as others. Despite increasing operations tempo, aging aircraft, and increases in depot scheduled downtime, we have improved fleet aircraft availability and mission-capable rates. The Air Force Reserve is postured to do its part to meet the operational and strategic demands of our nation's defense, but that mandate is not without its share of challenges. Our continued ability to maintain a sustainable force with sufficient operational capability is predicated on having sufficient manpower and resources. The work of this committee is key in supporting legislation that enables us to fully develop members of our full-time support program, both military technicians and our active guard reservists. You also provide us with the authority to implement necessary force management measures, and that has been and will continue to be vital to ensuring Air Force readiness is maintained at a high level. In a time of constrained budgets and higher costs, in-depth analysis is required to effectively prioritize our needs, but we must all appreciate the vital role that reserve components play in supporting our nation's defense and concentrate our resources in areas that will give us the most return on our investment. Thank you for asking me here today to discuss these important issues affecting our airmen, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. And General Stultz, Army Reserve.
Chairman Wilson, Ms. Davis, other committee members, it's a pleasure and an honor to be here today to testify before you and represent the 205,000 plus Army Reserve soldiers deployed around the world. Today we keep 25,000 plus soldiers on active duty, plus our full-time support force of about 16,000 soldiers serving this nation ongoing. We have been doing this since 2003. This morning I conducted a video teleconference with soldiers in Afghanistan, as I do frequently with soldiers in Afghanistan, Iraq, Horn of Africa, and other places. And I can report to you that they said their morale is great, they're proud of what they're doing, they're proud of serving. And every time I conduct a town hall meeting or a VTC session with reserve soldiers, I get the same report. Our retention rates right now are at 119% of goal. Our recruiting rates are over 100% of goal. We're turning away individuals that want to join the Army Reserve because I don't have room for them. Right now, the kids that we have coming in, and I call them kids because I'm 59 years old, are well educated, they've got good civilian jobs, they're living the American dream, and for some reason, they raise their hand and join our force, knowing that we're going to tell them that they're probably going to be called to go into war and risk their lives. And yet they're willing to do that. They tell me three things when I talk to them. Give me some predictability, because I have another life. Don't waste my time. If you're going to train me, make it meaningful. And third, use me. Don't put me back on the shelf. And that's why this access issue is such a key issue. Our soldiers that we have in our reserve components today are a national treasure. They are, as Ray said, a great return on investment for this country. But we've got to continue to use them in a meaningful way, or otherwise we'll lose them. And we can't afford to lose that national treasure. So I look forward to your question, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now proceed with Admiral Debank of the Naval Reserve.
Chairman Wilson, Ranking Member Davis, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I have a great appreciation for your support of the 64,631 sailors in our Navy Reserve and their family members. With me today is also my new Force Master Chief, Force Chris Wheeler. He assumed his role on the 16th of June as the 14th Master Chief of the Navy Reserve Force, representing the 52,000 of the Navy Reserve that form the backbone of our force, which is our enlisted sailors. To testify today, Navy Reserve sailors are operating globally. Approximately 30% of the Navy Reserve is providing support to Department of Defense operations, including more than 4,700 selected reserve sailors who are either mobilized in support of overseas contingency operations or in their training heading out to their mobilization sites. While fully engaged in these operations ever since September 11, 2001, your Navy Reserve has answered the call to assist with major global crisis events during the last several months, including Operation Tomodachi off Japan and Operation Odyssey Dawn in the Mediterranean. As our motto and our sailors proudly claim, we are ready now, anytime, anywhere. The legislative proposal before the Congress that provides for assured access to our reserve components for future routine deployments signifies a fundamental shift in the use of the reserves, recognizing both the high level of expertise resident in our Guard and Reserve forces, as well as a desire from today's reserve sailors to continue performing real and meaningful work within the Navy's total force. In order for our sailors to do so, we are ever mindful of the need to address the health and well-being of our sailors and their families. As written in the President's report entitled Strengthening Our Military Families, strong military families strengthen the fabric of America. And our fiscal year 12 budget request includes funding for vital programs in support of physical, psychological, and financial well-being of our Navy Reserve sailors and their families. Active support of our employers is also a primary concern. In fact, this month in the Navy, we are once again focusing on the more than 7,000 employers of Navy Reserve sailors worldwide, honoring them with special events here in Washington, D.C. last week, events at all of our Navy Operational Support Centers in all 50 states around the country, and directly at their places of employment as well. The data and the anecdotal evidence that we've gathered both point towards continued strong support, provided that we respect the three-way nature of the special relationship between our sailors, the needs of the Navy, and our employers' needs. It's a privilege to serve during this important and meaningful time in our nation's defense, especially as a Navy Reserve sailor. With your support, I'm confident your Navy Reserve will be able to continue supporting current operations while optimizing the strategic value of the Navy Reserve as a relevant force valued for our readiness, innovation, agility, and accessibility. Thank you for your demonstrated support, both the Navy and the Navy Reserve, and the families of our sailors, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Admiral. We proceed now to General Moore with the Marine Corps Reserve.
Sir, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today, and certainly it's a real pleasure to see you all here. You asked a question, or as part of your opening statement, I think we're all trying to divine the future here and really figure out, what this does look like post Afghanistan. One thing I can tell you is that Marine Reserves and their families and the employers of our Marine Reserves expect our Marine Reserves to continue to deploy. As has been previously mentioned this morning, or this afternoon rather, we do need, as General Stultz said, we need predictability. Marines tell me constantly, put me in the game, Coach. They want to continue to do that. Last week I was in Tbilisi, Georgia, and Constanta, Romania. We've got about 1,000 Marine Reserves out there for 4 months or so as part of the Black Sea Rotational Force. I think that does reflect a bit of the future for us there, that kind of theater security cooperation and partnership efforts that are important around the world. This afternoon, besides Afghanistan, we've got Marine Reserves in 17 countries around the world. I think that represents the future for us. And then after we finish today, I'm going to go out to Andrews and fly out to California. We've got 5,000 Marine Reserves in the field at Mountain Warfare Training Center, integrated with the 1st Marine Expeditionary Brigade headquarters from Camp Pendleton. So we've got an active duty headquarters sitting on top of a Reserve Infantry Regiment, a Reserve Marine Air Group, and a Reserve Combat Logistics Regiment. That's actually the largest exercise that will be conducted, active or reserve, for the Marine Corps, CONUS, this year. So we're an integral part of the total force. We train together, we have common bonds, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, and you actually saved time. That's amazing. General, thank you, and Admiral Callahan with the U.S. Coast Guard Reserve.
Good afternoon, Chairman Wilson and Ranking Member Davis and distinguished subcommittee members. Thank you for including the Coast Guard Reserve in today's hearing and for your continued support of Coast Guardsmen serving across our nation and overseas. I'm pleased to have this opportunity to appear before you today, and also sitting behind me is the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard Reserve Force, Master Chief Mark Allen, who represents the 8,100 members of our Reserve Force. For the Coast Guard Reserve, 2010 was an extraordinarily challenging year for us, dominated by the Deepwater Horizon oil spill and the largest Title 14 mobilization in United States history. It involved almost a third of our selective reserve. The Deepwater Horizon event affirmed the Coast Guard's effectiveness as America's maritime first responder, and particularly revealed the value and capacity and capability that our Coast Guard Reserve delivers in large-scale surge operations. At the peak of the Deepwater Horizon event, nearly 60% of the Coast Guard's individual responders were from our reserve component. Now, this large-scale mobilization did highlight a limitation in the Secretary's authority to order recall when demand for reserve mobilization exceeds Title 14 authorized limits of not more than 60 days in 4 months and not more than 120 days in any 2-year period. As a stopgap measure, we were able to issue more than 600 active duty for operational active component ADOS orders to reservists who requested and were supported and approved for Title 10 voluntary active duty upon completion of their 60-day Title 14 orders. Now, although this course of action allowed us to keep a sufficient number of reserve personnel eligible for involuntary recall, it would not give us the flexibility to manage the multiple event scenarios such as domestic hurricane responses that we were likely to face. So we're currently exploring options to address the 60-day Title 14 recall limitation and its effect on our readiness. I'm also pleased to report that we have woven the Yellow Ribbon Program as part of our congressionally mandated DoD Yellow Ribbon Reintegration Program into our Coast Guard Reserve deployment process. We held numerous Yellow Ribbon events and have more scheduled for the rest of the year. As our reservists continue to deploy in overseas contingency operations and other contingencies, I want to thank you and my fellow service reserve component chiefs for your continued support in the Yellow Ribbon Program, and we look forward to more support in the future. We continue working with the Office of the Secretary of Defense Reserve Affairs and our fellow reserve components to execute the Commission on National Guard and Reserve recommendations and have implemented the many benefits enacted into law. The 2008 National Defense Authorization Act authorized early retirement benefits for eligible reservists who serve on active duty under various sections of Title 10 and Title 32. We are actively reviewing options to ensure that Coast Guard reservists mobilized under Title 14 qualify for that same early retirement benefit. Our Reserve Force remains actively engaged in expeditionary and domestic missions in support of overseas contingency operations and national disasters, and since September 2001, we've recalled more than 7,800 reservists under Title 10 and more than 3,300 under Title 14. Mr. Chairman, our experiences over the past year have clearly demonstrated the value of the Coast Guard Reserve in the defense and security of our nation, not only in the homeland, but overseas as well. Our Coast Guardmen serving in the reserve component proudly stand the watch and remain true to the Coast Guard's motto, Semper Paratus, always ready. So on behalf of the men and women of the Coast Guard, we thank you for your support and thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. And at this time, we will begin the questions. We will abide by a 5-minute rule, which applies to me too, and each member of the committee and Craig Green, who is our professional staff member, who will keep the time for us. I'd like to point out, too, how grateful I am. We have another record turnout of members of the subcommittee. They truly have so many different obligations, and so it's a real testimony to their commitment to our military that they would be here today. As I begin, I would like to thank each of you for your service, and as I look at each of you, I'm just so impressed, and it reminds me why I served 3 years in the reserves, 28 years in the National Guard, and that is that it was the people that I had the privilege of serving with, and the most capable, competent, patriotic persons that I've had the privilege of working with have been in the reserves and the Guard. So I want to thank you. Obviously, it had an effect on my sons. My youngest son was just commissioned a second lieutenant and is working for General Stultz. He's a combat engineer, and so I'm very good. And he's at annual training right now today. And then I was really grateful. Only one son's a bit off track. He's a doctor in the Navy, and General Moore. And I give all credit to my wife. But General Moore, you mentioned about visiting Constanta. I was on a sister city visit to Cluj-Napoca, Romania in 1997. And my son was getting ready to go to the Naval Academy. And members of the city council there with tears in their eyes said that one day we dream of the American military and Navy appearing at Constanta with a relationship with Romania. And so this was a country that had been under Ceausescu. And so how exciting to me of what success the American military. You should be proud that there's a greater spread of democracy and freedom today in the world because of your service. With my question, General McKinley, the Defense Authorization Act that the House version provides for the creation of a vice chief for the National Guard Bureau, and it reflects a change, transforming your office from one which is administrative to operational. How do you feel about this? And then is there any potential of conflict with your role with Northcom?
Thanks, Chairman Wilson. As you know, I've worked within the building for the past 2.5 years to seek support for the Vice Chief of the National Guard Bureau. I think it's essential for our continued assumption of new responsibilities as a joint activity of the Department of Defense. Obviously, with some of the downsizing that former Secretary Gates had pushed through the building, the timing wasn't that good. But I think my fellow reserve chiefs can attest to the fact that having a strong deputy or vice chief in this very critical time to cover the required meetings and to support the soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines that we all work with is vitally important. So I certainly look forward to the debate that occurs. We certainly can use the Vice Chief of the National Guard Bureau, put them to good service. It also helps build our bench for future officers to assume my grade.
And for each of you, and certainly won't be able to get all the way through, but Admiral, since you're sitting first, proceeding this way, the issue of mobilization authority. The Department of Defense has made recommendations for flexibility. How do you feel about this?
I think it's essential, and the current proposal, I believe, will meet the need. As we started down this path, say, 2 years ago, it was all about accessibility to the Reserve and Guard. And in the end, I think the most important thing this legislation will do is provide the assurance to the Department that when we're doing the planning and programming, that the Reserve component, the Guard component, will be there for them, because that's been the issue that has been debate on the other side of the river taking place is how do we know you're really going to be there for us? Unless we know you're going to be there, we can't program for you, can't plan for you, can't budget for you. So this will give them that assurance.
And General Wyatt?
Mr. Chairman, I agree with the Admiral. You know, I mentioned earlier that the Air National Guard provides 75% of the requests for forces from the Air Force with volunteerism, but that was not meant to diminish the importance of this legislation, because there are different scenarios that would help the Air Force believe that it has more access with the passage of this legislation. So it is important for the accessibility of all the reserve components, not to be confused with the fact that we already are accessible, but this would help assure the service chiefs that they can reach out and touch the Guard and Reserve when they need to.
Thank you. General Stenner.
I'll second each of the previous speakers and go along the lines of it will give us the access, but it will also allow the planners to do as they need to do to size our force appropriately. After that, I think it's incumbent on us in the uniform here to figure out the policies that go along with that access to ensure there's no overuse of this particular access, because that could in fact be a downside. When a particular skill set is required over and over, we will in fact have a dwell issue. So I would caution against that, and it's up to us in the uniform to make that.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to call time on myself. General McKinley, I apologize, but we proceed to Ms. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again to all of you. We appreciate your service and certainly your leadership. You know, we're certainly aware that the proposed language offered out to the Department would provide broad authority to call up and to deploy reservists and National Guardsmen. And I want to ask you all if there are any factors that you think would impede that, would make it more difficult for that to be carried out. And I think the other, I guess the flip side of that is what can be done to assure reservists that they'll be utilized for operational missions and not just called back to backfill essentially requirements as the active force draws down. We know that there are likely to be changes as we look at limiting resources in some way. And I would be naive to think that that's not going to hit the Guard and Reserve in some way. So I'm just interested in knowing from your perspective how you see that issue, and it really does speak to the meaningfulness of the role, the operational role, particularly that Guard and Reserve speak of, which I think does keep them engaged and certainly committed to continuing their service.
Ma'am, these last 10 years have been remarkable years in American history, and for all of us who represent our Reserve and Guard, we've seen this great resilience created and a force of over 1 million people represented here at this table who do work. They strive to do the best job they can, but they're now the best equipped, best led, most combat seasoned force in the Reserve component history. So I don't see things impeding the progress that the Reserve components have made over the last 10 years. But as General Stultz said, if we can create the environment of predictability and stability, and if we can assure our young men and women who've joined, predominantly most of us since September 11, 2001, that they'll have a meaningful job and that they'll be used effectively, then I think we stand shoulder to shoulder with the young people who've dedicated themselves to this nation.
I'll just add that I think this is critical to our national defense, because as we eventually get out of Iraq and Afghanistan, I think we're going to shift our focus in the 4 Ps of prepare, prevent, prevail, preserve, from prevail to prevent. Where can we get engaged, just like we were talking in Romania and Georgia and places like that, and places we're engaged today, to prevent getting into the future conflicts. And that theater engagement, security cooperation, really, they're asking for medical support, they're asking for engineer support, they're asking for logistics support, they're asking for those capabilities that, between General Carpenter and I, we have the preponderance of. Today, between the Guard and Reserve, we have 75% of the engineer capability of the Army. We have 70% of the medical capability of the Army. We have about 70% of the MP capability, 70% of the logistics capability, 85% of the civil affairs capability. So it's not a matter of us backfilling the Army. We are the Army. And we're going to be the future. And so to do this security cooperation and theater engagement this nation's going to need for the future, they're going to have to use the Reserve. So we need to change the law so that we make it easy in that context.
From the Army Guard perspective, a couple of comments. First of all, the process that we have for mobilization right now calls for 2 years notification of sourcing. And through the National Guard Bureau and through our directorate in the Army Guard, we source units against missions. So we will have 2 years to sort out which mission we're going to take and which unit or which state is going to shoulder that mission. We do that today, and we're very successful in the mobilization business. We have not had any significant problems at all as we have dealt with the adjutant generals in that role. The coordination for that is going to take place between the Army National Guard and the Army and with the adjutant generals. The adjutant generals are strongly in support of this access issue, and I'm confident that they're going to figure out exactly the process for mobilization. That really is where the crux of the matter is the soldier who has a job going to be allowed to leave that job to go for 60 days for one of these theater security cooperation efforts. And I can tell you, I'm an engineer officer, and I've got a book, and it shows a picture in 1960 of a paving project. And that paving project is the Corps of Engineers in Afghanistan in 1960. And think how things would have changed if we had been willing to stay in that kind of an effort over the longer period of time since 1960. And so this theater security cooperation, if we do this right, our soldiers will understand the importance of that it's just as important as going downrange and serving in Iraq and Afghanistan, because it's a preventative measure.
Thank you. I certainly appreciate that, and I just want to applaud very quickly. I know that I've had an opportunity to speak to several of you about the transition programs for our soldiers, airmen, Navy, Marine going back, and I think that we need to learn from some of the good work that you all have done. Thank you.
Dr. Joe Heck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Didn't realize I was up that fast in the queue. First, thank you all for the service, not just to our nation, but to the men and women that you represent. And Mr. Chairman, in all full disclosure, I'm still a member of the active reserve, and General Stultz is my chief. So I'm not going to ask him any questions. I'm asking everybody else now. I appreciate, General Stultz, your comment of how we want to be used. And one of the issues that always seems to come up is how can we best utilize folks in their community in support of community-type operations from the Title X side, not the National Guard side necessarily. And the issues that we face when trying to do that, primarily in funding and getting the MOU, running it up the JAG chain, and making sure that we can do all these things. And by the time that's done, the community event is over. So in the vein of this being a great recruiting tool because it gets our folks out into the community, it keeps their skills sharp, it builds their confidence and unit cohesion, and, quote, it keeps them off the shelf, end quote, which is what we're all looking to do. What can we do to help streamline that process so that if a community event comes up, for instance, one of my units, they want a medic to stand by with an aid bag in case somebody goes down, that we can get that done and do that mission without having to take so long to get it processed?
Well, I think we have been in discussion, obviously, with some of the members of Congress of changing the policy on the use of the Title X reserves in the homeland, and make sure that the National Guard is always going to be the military first responder because the Title X or Title 32 authority the governor has and being able to utilize them and the magnificent response that they give. But we have said we've got a lot of capabilities also in the communities that should be made available for disasters or whatever type of events. We need to change some of the laws that restrict us in doing that, of how you can use the Title X reserve in the homeland. And then I think within the department, we need to change some of the policies of what it takes to get approval, because just as you've indicated, the soldiers want to do that. They're citizens of Nevada, and they want to help out in their state, and they want to be recognized by their state. We limit them from doing that because of our laws and our policies.
I appreciate that. General McKinley, can you give us an update on how the process is going with NORTHCOM doing the training of National Guard officers to be the dual-hatted commander when we move forward and integrate Title X forces under active guard?
Thank you, sir. It's been a great year with Admiral Sandy Winterfield being out as the combatant commander at NORTHCOM in Colorado Springs. He walked in with a fresh idea, fresh thinking, and involved all of us actually. And the contingency dual status commander, now we just call dual status command, has been embraced by the governors of the 50 states, the 3 territories, and the district. We've made significant progress in getting the unity of effort and the chains of command set so that we can utilize all the services that you see before you today. And so I'm pleased to report that we're making great progress in that area. 38 states have the dual status commander already trained. The rest will be in the next class in Colorado Springs. So we'll be set to represent the governors and the federal government so that we can utilize all the forces to save citizens' lives here at home.
Great. Thanks for that update. And last question, and I don't know if it applies across all reserve forces or, again, if it's just USAR specific, but the idea of providing predictability obviously is very important for somebody who's twice the citizen. But what we find sometimes for those of us that are in TDA units that don't necessarily get sourced, as opposed to a TO&E unit, that we do become the manpower pool. And although you may not be in year 5 of your off-region cycle, you're getting yanked to be a backfill person. What kind of prevention or preventive strategies are we putting in to try to keep TDA in line with that off-region 5-year cycle?
That is a great point, because as you very well know, for the Army Reserve, we have a huge portion of the generating force for the Army. The medical force, we represent 60% of the medical structure for the Army, but we represent a huge force in the training base of the Army, the drill sergeants, the MOS trainers, the people who do the collective training for the Army. And what we have recommended is we need to apply that same model to the forces that are in those units. One, because we owe that soldier predictability, that he's not going to get yanked if we have this authority. But number two, to provide predictability to the Army. So if I can take let's say a training battalion that's got 5 companies of drill sergeants, and I can say to TRADOC, every year I'll give you one of those companies. Then I've given them predictability of how they can plan their training cycles, and I've given my soldiers predictability. So I think we've got to take our TDA force as well as our MTO force and put them into that ARFIGEN cycle.
Great. Again, thank you all very much for your lifetime of service to our nation and to our men and women in uniform. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Loebsack.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thanks to all of you on the panel today for your, excuse me, for your service and for being here. And I want to make particular mention of the great turnout today, too, as the chairman did. And I think it's actually a credit to the chairman and to Ms. Davis. And they're working together on a bipartisan basis in the subcommittee and in the larger committee. So I want to make sure that we all give them tremendous credit, especially the chairman. General McKinley, it's my understanding that the Per Diem Committee ruled in February that members of the National Guard being put on Title 10 orders from Title 32 should have their basic allowance for housing recalculated based on their home of record. And since their BAH, when they are under Title 32 orders, is based on their permanent duty location, soldiers, airmen, and their families are often losing money because of this recalculation. I don't think this recalculation makes much sense to me, and that's why Congresswoman Bordallo and I are working together to take a hard look at solutions to the problem in general. Can you just share some of your thoughts on that issue today?
Well, if I could ask my colleagues who represent the preponderance of the Guard force to talk specifically to the Army Guard and the Air Guard piece of that, and then I'm sure we all do, and I have a comment at the end, sir.
Thank you.
Congressman, this first came to our attention here about 6 months ago when the Adjutant General of Massachusetts surfaced this issue, and it was disadvantaging his soldiers in Massachusetts as they mobilized and deployed. We went to and worked with the Army on this specific issue, and the problem that we've got is it's a statutory issue, and so it's in the Joint Travel Regulation, and that's a DOD level decision. We are now in the process of submitting through the Army a request to change that particular part of the Joint Travel Regulation to allow for the change that you're advocating so that we don't disadvantage the soldiers. So it is in process now, sir.
Okay.
What the current DOD instruction does, as General Carpenter indicated, sets up differences between the calculations as it applies to a drill status guardsman, which is based upon home of record, and an AGR, for example, that's based upon permanent duty stations. You've accurately outlined the differences. And I guess maybe the reason why there was a difference is because a lot of the drill status guardsmen might have a tendency to live further away. But regardless, I think anything that could be done with the DODI, and we're going through the same thing with the Air Force that General Carpenter is with the Army, to put consistency and eliminate the differences between the different statuses that we have in the Air National Guard would certainly be fairer to all of our members, and that's the objective, I believe.
Thank you.
My final comment is we're working with the Department, Secretary McGinnis, and the Chairman and the Secretary to try to resolve this, sir.
Thank you very much. One other question, that's for the three of you also. I might just preface it by stating how proud I am of our Iowa National Guard. The 2,800 who are largely back now from Afghanistan, and they've done a great job over there. But again, the dual role that the National Guard plays, you all know about the floods of Iowa in 2008. Now we've got floods in western Iowa along the Missouri River. And just a general question, how are we going to keep the training, the equipment, everything that we need for the Guard, not to take away from the reserves as well, but it's a Guard question specifically. How are we going to do this going forward? I know that's a big question. We only have 1 minute and 5 seconds left, but to the extent to which you can answer that question, that'd be great. Thank you.
We're in the midst, as you can imagine, of some serious budget talks for us with the Army and the Air Force, and the two directors are up to their necks in trying to make the case that this great force that we've created over time needs to have adequate resources to sustain itself. Right. And for that dual mission of the state and the federal mission, the Guard is trying to make the case with the services that you just can't walk away from it. So, Ray and Bud, in 30 seconds, how are we doing?
Accessibility, whether it's the fight overseas or at home, takes proper statutory authorities. We're talking about that today. It also takes proper training and resourcing to make sure that we're trained to that level. But it also takes appropriate planning. And what this legislation does for the fight overseas helps us with that. But to be accessible, you have to have the statutory, you have to have the people and the equipment and the training, but you also have to plan for MPA days to pay the folks when they come on duty.
Mr. Congressman, not unlike General Stultz, we are seeing unprecedented retention rates as well as recruiting rates, and that's a function of people who want to come and do something for their nation, and they want to be part of something. If we don't use these soldiers, if we don't meet their expectations, they will leave us just as quickly as they came to us. The Guard right now has more equipment, modern equipment, than we've ever had. We've got the battle-experienced soldiers, and it would be a shame for us to walk away from that.
And I'm very proud of the readiness centers we've been able to build around the country as well, thanks to this committee and to the relevant appropriations committee as well. Thanks to all of you for your great service, and thank you for indulging me, Mr. Chair, and letting me go a little longer. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Lobzak, thank you for your active involvement in the committee. And we next proceed to Mr. Kaufman.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a big proponent of the Guard and Reserve having served in the Army Reserve, the Marine Corps, and the Marine Corps Reserve, and having deployed twice in combat in the Marine Corps Reserve. My fundamental concern is this, that we are in an environment of tremendous fiscal pressures, and I think that defense is going to have a target on its back in these coming debates. And I think Secretary of Defense, former Secretary of Defense Gates, I think expressed before the Armed Services Committee on a number of occasions his concern about the trajectory of costs, the growing personnel cost relative to acquisition cost, and if it is not corrected, will we in fact become a hollow force over time, as some of our NATO allies have become. And so I think that from my view, one of the solutions in this equation is the Guard and Reserve. That we know that the personnel costs are greatly reduced with the Guard and Reserve relative to active units with the same capability, retaining that capability. And so it is my view that we need to look at restructuring our military with emphasis in the Guard and Reserve. The fact is today, we don't have the kind of peer competitor, we don't want one, that we did during the Cold War that required a very large standing military. We're not going to be doing another Iraq and Afghanistan. I think the former Secretary of Defense said it well, that if, I think in a speech before West Point, words to the effect, if another general came to me and said we ought to invade, pacify and administer another country, to tell him, I think, words to the effect, he was nuts. We're not going down that road again. I think Yemen and Somalia are the template for the future. It's more counterterrorism, more lighter footprint, more special operations. So I just think that we need to retain this capability, and the only way to retain this capability under the kind of fiscal pressures that we have is a greater emphasis in the Guard and Reserve components of the United States military. And General McKinley, could you respond to that?
Thanks, Congressman Kaufman. After every major war in the 20th century, the Guard and Reserve was put back on the shelf. My intuition tells me that we're going to have to argue very strenuously in front of our services to make the case that you just made. We are but one vote in councils that are decided mostly on Title X issues. We've just started making our case on the value proposition, but you've said it better than I could say it for sure. We are here to tell you that we believe we are the answer to America's security needs in a time of fiscal constraint, and we're willing to put our forces on the line operationally, their capability, their equipment, and their leadership to make that case in front of the American people.
You know, I think there are within our force structure, there's the expeditionary components that are necessary to retain on active duty, but it is my position that we need to expand, in this restructuring, we need to look at expanding the Guard and Reserve because it's the only way that the United States can maintain its military capability given the fiscal pressures that we have. And I think that we could do that certainly without in any way sacrificing the national security interests of the United States. But if we in fact go in with making cuts that simply reduced in strength without doing the restructuring I've talked about, we will compromise our capability. And I'm very concerned about that. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your military service. And we're grateful to have Congresswoman Madeline Bordallo of Guam.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I thank all of our witnesses, and there are a lot of stars out there. My first question is for General Carpenter. As you know, we have more Guardsmen serving per capita on Guam than does any other state or territory in our country. The Western Pacific, and of course our chairman is aware of that. He was there when that was presented to us on Guam. The Western Pacific has unique challenges, as all of you know, and one of these challenges is funding for travel for soldiers to get between the islands within the Northern Marianas to get to their drill site. Now, we have repeatedly passed the authority to reimburse certain members of the National Guard for travel expenses related to inactive duty training, yet movement to get this going has yet to come. However, this broader authority has run into issues with the per diem committee's 150-mile rule, and as I understand it, there is a business case for waiving the 150-mile rule for Guam National Guardsmen and possibly other locations because travel is only permissible through expensive airfare. When will these policies be amended to take into consideration the distinctive challenges that we face on Guam? And I get the sense that there continues to be a disconnect between the active duty Army and Army Guard on this matter, and I want to see a resolution sooner rather than later.
Congresswoman, you brought this issue to our attention about almost a year ago.
That's correct.
And we raised the issue with the Army. We prepared the request for the exception to the authority to be able to provide support for people in Saipan who wanted to be part of the Guam National Guard, for them to be able to get their commuting expenses covered between the islands. That is still in process. Let me take that for the record, and I owe you an answer, ma'am.
Thank you very much, General, and I'll expect that it's going to be a good answer. My second question is for, well, each of the reserve chiefs, but I don't know that I have the time to hear, but if a couple of you can answer this. Given that reserve and guard benefits and entitlements are earned based on the kind of orders an individual is serving and the length of time, are each of the services ensuring that their members know exactly what legal authority they are on orders under every time they go on active duty? And do their orders capture this important information? Whichever one of you.
I'll start and just be brief enough so I give my counterparts the time. But we do put on those orders under which authority they were ordered to duty. So there are specific entitlements that they can have, and that's the technical answer to your question. What type of orders the folks are asking for right now has also kind of evolved from we're ready to go on a volunteer status to over a 10-year period of time. We found that has increased from 80% to, or decreased from 80% to about 65% that do want the authorities and the protections that come with some of the other types of ordered to duty. So we're working through that issue as we speak with how to ensure that they get on the right set of orders at the right time.
Thank you.
I'll echo what Charlie said, but the thing that we're really trying to focus on in the Army Reserve, one is we want to reduce the number of duty statuses. We got way too many duty statuses, and it makes it too confusing, and it just as you pointed out, you've got too many differences in benefits. And the problem comes in which pot of money. Because that soldier may say, put me on this type of order because this is the benefit I need, but we may have a different pot of money that comes from a different order. And you may have two soldiers serving in the same location on two different sets of orders with two different types of benefits. And that to me is not acceptable. So we're trying to say let's reduce the number of duty statuses we have down to the minimum so that when we put somebody on orders, they're all on the same type of orders.
Thank you. And is there another? Yes.
I was going to offer that one of the benefits of the long war that we've been about for the last 10 years is refining our procedures, and in particular in our case, we have a Navy mobilization processing centers that we send all of our sailors through, because communications is one of the biggest challenges, and making sure those sailors understand the type of orders and the benefits with those orders. In fact, one of the problems we have is pushback that why do I have to go to the NNPS? Well, this is why, in order to be informed, fully informed, as we work through then the challenges of streamlining things in the future.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. And we now proceed to Congressman Robert Brady of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, thank you for your service to our nation, and thank the men and women that serve underneath you. I really have a request more than a question. I have a full-time staff member on my staff that deals mainly in military issues. 90% of the requests that he gets are with medical and disability issues. And they pertain to, you know, expediting their issues and their problems. I mean, it's a good morale factor that when they know that they're out there serving, and men and women are out there serving in harm's way, know that when they come back into civility, that into the civilian status, that they do have these benefits that are readily, you know, offered to them, and don't have to call a congressperson. Not that I don't mind taking the calls or trying to help them, but myself and my staff people run into major red tape trying to get things done for disability pay or for their request for medical care. So I would just ask you again if you could, you know, look into that and, you know, make sure that our men and women that are in harm's way, when they do come back home, that we do show them the proper respect and taking care of their issues that they have, whether it be a medical issue or a disability that they need, that can't go back into the workforce that they started out in. And it's a pretty important issue that we get 90% of the calls. So I thank you for that again. Thank you for your service. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. And as we conclude, Ms. Davis would like to make a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just going to follow up really on the question that Mr. Kaufman and I think others were raising as well, and just in terms of that, the access issue. And I think just from our point of view, certainly from my point of view, is trying to understand, you know, what those costs are. Obviously, the mobilization, there are additional costs that are built into that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that all the costs, you know, are higher. And I think when we can break that down transparently and really understand it, then we can be active in trying to present that argument as well. Thank you all so much for, again, for your service and leadership.
And as we conclude, I want to thank you again for your service, the people who work with you, the service members, their military families, the veterans who make it possible for us to have the freedoms that we enjoy. Additionally, I want to thank you for the opportunity that you provide for the young people of our country to serve our country, to truly use their talents that they have. And that's why I'm very impressed, and I know that Reserve and Guard members want to be actively involved, and it makes a difference for our country. At this time, we shall be adjourned.